basic introduction to HTML and CSS with examples and such. For those with computers and want to, you can follow along with some of the examples we're doing. We'll also have links I'll show that will show what we're doing as well. So some definitions first. HTML actually stands for Hypertext Markup Language. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Both file types are actually just formatted text. It can be created and viewed and edited in any text editor. We'll be using the site codepin.io to display some of the results of these samples we create here. So just to begin, let's create a simple HTML page. Hello world. So I'm just going to open up a text editor here. HTML. Head. Title. Bear with me, I'm not familiar with this keyboard. Always close your HTML tags. If you don't, you'll run into some headaches there. Body. Save. And now I have to go to.
Okay, I'll figure it out.
So,
Yeah.
when you open it up, you have your standard HTML
Yeah, I'll figure it
page.
Oh, yeah.
So we save the file as HTML hello, we open it up. And notice that all the opening elements have closing elements. Very important to maintain the integrity of the page for the browser to be able to render it.
Chapter.
So some of the tags that you saw there, the HTML tag is a required tag used for the opening of the document. The head tag is also required. It contains a location of the information about the page. It starts immediately after the HTML tag. Title is the title of the page. Your body is required one that starts right after your head. And everything about the document as far as what you're going to place in the text images go in there. Div tag is nothing more than a container that encapsulates the other elements, dividing the HTML page into sections. Spans like a div, but it's for inline rendering instead of block level. And then the image tag is how you define images that go on the page. Each HTML element has a list of attributes attached to it. And click the link, and you can see how they define that. There are also attributes that have consistent use across multiple elements. Really what we're going to focus on are the class element. That's how you go about assigning classes, CSS classes to a particular element. Where the ID element, which is how you give your elements unique names for that particular page. And then source is how you attach images and such. So for CSS, CSS is the method that allows, Okay. CSS is the method that allows the developer to separate the content of the page from the presentation. CSS is implemented where a given property, element property, the last value says the last value used. That's a very important thing that we'll see when we get here. The little graphical icon there shows actually how you go about trying to separate your HTML page during your development cycle. HTML contains the structure of the page, CSS contains the presentation parts of the page, and then the JavaScript actually controls the behavior of the page. If you've ever been, you're browsing online and you hit a page and it just comes up and it's just all white and just this long flowing text and there seems to be no formatting and whatever, in a situation like that, the CSS wasn't downloaded. So you're just seeing the raw rendering of that HTML page without the CSS. Typically, you just hit refresh, the CSS comes down, and then it'll format nice and pretty and be usable. So when you're doing HTML development, the biggest thing is that the web has millions and millions of HTML and CSS examples that to view and learn from. Every site, every page you visit, it's just another demonstration of what can be done. Again, HTML and CSS are text-based. You can't really hide it. You can try to make it harder to read, but if you're willing to put the time in, you can see exactly what's going on. There are additional help and tutorials online that exist. All browsers now have built-in developer tools that allow the user to see how the page gets rendered and how the CSS gets applied to it. And typically for Mozilla IE and Chrome, I know of those three, you access it, you hit F12 and you'll see the developer. So like, for instance here, this isn't mine. For this page here, if I hit F12, and up here pops up the developer tools. So if you go to Inspector, I'm going to pop this out so you can see it. Here's exactly, this is how it's been rendered. You see all the divs, and then their scripts. Here's a so it'll actually, when you go over, you'll see how it is. So if you look at this top nav, you can actually start, there's an example, there's a div there, and then you can, looking here, you can actually see how the CSS has been rendered by the different files and whatever. So when I'm saying it's override, they have defaults here. Every time you see a line out, that means it's been overridden. And then the computed one will actually show you what the actual final results for that rendering are. So what's really interesting and what's really cool about using a developer like this is that you can actually disable font, and you can see how that will actually change the rendering of the page. So we'll get into more of that a little bit later. Okay, so CSS attributes. The ones we're going to look at today, there are hundreds of different attributes available. We're going to look at font family, font size, color, background color, margin pattern, border, width, text alignment. This is how these are ways you can control how your particular elements will, or your values will render within the elements of the HTML. So here's a CSS example. So I'm going to bring up, so working off of the example we came together with, the hello, can I, They're not going to let me copy. Okay, so body, font, family, and this Notepad++ is helping me out with my typing here. TICAVRDANA. So this, right now I'm setting for the particular body, I'm setting the default font to use. I'm going to set the default size. And I'm going to set the background color. Okay, then for standard divs, I'm going to set my font size to be larger. And then I'm going to set the color, which is the foreground color, there. I'm going to save that. So I've saved that as base.css. So we're going to revisit that, that initial page we created, and we're going to have to add the link back, so back to the original HTML. So CSS gets links get defined within the header section, and keep the one thing you have to worry about in this is that it's very finicky in how it likes things. So your quotes actually have to be quotes. ST1. CSS. And then I'm going to put that hello world in a div tag. HTML. And then we're going to add an image here at the very bottom. /. Okay, so with that complete, we'll save it. We'll go back to our Hello World sample here. And when we hit refresh, you're going to see what we did apply. We applied the background color of a light gray. We added the particular items. Where's my... I have an error within my HTML. I did not close the source tag. So there's the code RGB image. So as I did, I expect the elements, and you can see how the particular that CSS we developed has rendered the page. So if we wanted to change, so if we could go in here, and again, as I said, we can make this background much darker. And then you could actually see how your changes will affect the page. So there it is with the red background. I'll put a green background on there. So that's how powerful these development tools can be in your development of CSS. It allows you to see exactly how everything got rendered. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to expand the CSS example now and add additional items about these. And what's important here is I want to show the different types of CSS you can end up writing here. So we have our standard div and body that was, or body tag and div from before, but now I'm going to add a div hello, which is I'm creating a class here that I'm going to then make the font size double. Okay, and then I'm going to create just a I'm just going to create another class, and I'm going to center the text. And there's nothing. As you can see here, there's nothing special about this one. It's not actually tied to a particular element. It's just a unique class. And then this third kind is actually a CSS tag based off of an ID. So you can create, I don't particularly like this one, but I wanted to demonstrate it. And then I'm going to change the logo, set up a logo, and give it a fixed height because it's actually rather large currently. Okay, so I've saved, so we've gone ahead and expanded our CSS example. So now we need to apply those new classes and IDs to our HTML page. So for the hello world, we're going to create the class hello, link to that one. And we created a class for question. And then we're going to create an ID here that corresponds to the tag we created there. And then for the image, we're going to add that logo class. And then save it. And then so our rendering for this, when we refresh, we've again based off of what our HTML was. For the class, div class, we decided to render it at twice the size of the others. For the question class, we centered the text on the page. And for the ID here, we changed the color. So if you can see how right here that if you disable, like if I disable this one, then the div tag takes over. But since the learning ID supersedes the div, when you bring that back on, that's how it gets applied. And then the logo here has that height, the 48 pixels. So if you so that's how you can. There's an example of how when you set up your classes and you set up everything, you can go ahead and how it cascades the styles being applied to the HTML. So once you have all your HTML rendered the way, or laid out, or defined the way you want, then you just spend your time working on the CSS to get it so it will render the page properly. Okay. So that's just how. So next, the order in which the CSS files are added is extremely important. Later definitions always override the earlier ones. So when you go, you can have multiple CSS files defined within an HTML. The order in which you add them is very important. The order in which you add additional classes, either on the page or through the CSS, is very, very important, because a later definition will override the earlier one. Elements get rendered from the position of the parent element, not necessarily in general. There are ways to override that, but typically elements are rendered from the position of the parent. When you're struggling to try to get a particular layout right, break the page into individual pieces and then work out the layout of those individual pieces. Once you get that layout work, then try to bring them back together. Try to use a consistent naming pattern for the elements in the CSS. Nothing's more frustrated than that jump between different naming styles. You also need to make sure they're consistent across the entire site, or you're going to end up with conflicts. And then search what you don't know. I'm always on Google. For this presentation, I spent a lot of time on Google just trying to go through different elements, looking for different things. So don't be afraid. If you don't know something, just search it. If you see something on a site that you find interesting, then you can go ahead and just look at the developer tools, bring it up, go through and find the area that you like, and then see what they're doing to try to render it. So a CSS reset file is a way to standardize HTML, the initial HTML rendering across multiple browsers. Every browser has their own default way they handle margins and padding, fonts, font sizes for all their different elements, and a reset file will set those all to one consistent value so that you can then build from that. So I'm actually going to do a search for a reset file. And typically, if you're looking for HTML and CSS, I always start with HTML, CSS, and then there you go, reset. So and this one. So here's an example of a reset file. I'm just going to copy this in its entirety. New text document, reset, .css. Add and save. So we can go ahead and see how that affects it by adding this reset to our sample HTML file. And then we hit refresh. Did I save it? No, it did not save. Here we go. We'll try it again with the. So you saw how the site, everything shifted up into the left. That's removing the reset file. That's what happened was the reset file removed the default padding for this is Chrome. And so when it did that, it shifted everything up. So your IE, Mozilla, Chrome, they all have different defaults for their padding stuff and how they initially render stuff. And a reset file will zero all those things out so that you can then go ahead and apply your own styles. It's one of the things I learned trying to render something across multiple browsers. When you think you got something lined up in one place and you look at a different browser and it's not, it's because you're fighting what those initial values are. So if you just reset, then the rendering in general will be consistent. Cross-browser development is always interesting. So we'll talk a little bit about margins, patterns, and borders. For the particular div hello, we're going to add some additional things to it to see exactly how it will how you can get extra space and such into your document. So I'm going to add a background color. I got the font size. I'm going to center the text. I'm going to add a margin. And if you noticed here, when this rendering, you see margin, you can either render a margin that's consistent across all four sides, or you can render a margin that's one side dependent. So I'm going to add a margin, I'm going to add a padding. And then I'm going to add a border because I want to see, I use borders when in development to be able to see how things render or what space it's taking up. Yeah, I said a background color, and then a border so things will stand out more. So that change I've made, let's render it. And you'll see the center, there's the margin. So if I want to inspect this element, you can actually see over in this area, you can see how the margin, border, and padding get applied to this element. So there's the margin from the top. There's your 16 margin, and then you'll see the 8 padding is on the inside, and then they render the text. So if you take away the margin, it immediately butts up into the top and to the sides. And if you take away the padding, then you can see how that affects. And I made a mistake in the typing in the border because I forgot the colon. And then here's the border helps you identify what the developer tool is showing. Okay, so div, I call this div.wrapper. It's not intuitive when you try to center a div. When you use text apply, it centers the text within the div. If you want the div itself centered and the text to be left, it's tricky. But what you can do, the trick is to set the margin left and margin right to be auto. So we will pull up. We'll pull up our sample that we've been working on. So we're going to create a new class, and then we're going to apply. Okay. Now we need to add the CSS to this as well. So in our base CSS class, we're going to use that class name we created. And we're going to add a background color. So our text is going to be black on white, because that's the easiest to read. We're going to have a width of 800 pixels. And then margin left of auto, margin right of auto. So we've saved both files. And now we're going to refresh, and you'll see how that actually changes. This is our div.wrapper that we have gotten defined, and it supplies. There's your. So if you take away your autos, and so the width there supplies. So you need all three of these elements. The width supplies the width of your particular page, and then the autos define to center, and that causes the div to center itself. Okay, so now we're going to actually work on changing our example to mirror more of what of a standard website layout might be, which would be a header, three columns, a three-column table, and a footer. Okay, so we're going to keep the wrapper and add some new elements. Class header. Okay. Now, so we've got the HTML defined. Now we have to go ahead and define the CSS for this. Well, I'm going to click here. This will show you how it renders for this. So with everything defined, that's how that HTML and CSS will render. So this is the code pin I was talking about earlier. So that's how you would end up doing a three-column table. So left, center, right. Finally, we're going to talk about trying to make your HTML screen size dependent. With the variety of different devices, tablets, phones, you want to be able to identify what the size of your screen is, and then try to render your site using that. So I'm going to bring this up again, so I can just copy the CSS. So if you notice, we're not changing the HTML to apply this. This is strictly a CSS addition. So this isn't going to affect the change of the site any here. But when you shrink the site down, all of a sudden, once you hit that magic number, then everything about the site will change. In this case, I'm going to shrink this down because the text. So what we're doing with the CSS is that when the screen size gets below, that's hard to read. When the screen size gets below 480, we're going to change the background color. Then we're going to not display the left column at all. And then we're going to turn around. Because when we did the three-column, we had the left column floats left, the right column floats right at 20% of the width. And then the center column gets displayed in the middle of that. And that's how the HTML is going to render to that CSS. Well, when the screen size changes, what we want to do is we want just the center to be the standard block, and we're not going to float the left. We're not going to display the left column at all, and we're going to just float the right. And then we're going to change the wrapper from the 800 width to 400 width. So, and that's how this renders. So it goes from your standard main site to a mobile site. And you handle that all within the one CSS file. So that what you're trying to do is you want the HTML portion to render consistently. You want the HTML to remain consistent, and use the CSS to control how the site gets rendered based off the visual display you're after. So, any questions?
You're using just one file right now?
Yep.
Right?
Just one HTML file. Yes. I've been changing it.
Yeah.
Actually, I had on my computer all of them set up so I could just copy and paste, and then I couldn't use my computer, so I've been stuck trying to copy everything. But really and that's really what you end up doing when you go to do your site layouts, is that you develop just one standard and get your one standard layout to look exactly what you want it to do, and you just keep reusing that layout over and over again. There are particular, once you start talking about scripting languages and what you can do on the web, from what the web server side of it, there are different ways to try to mash up an HTML template with your data that you want to display in an effort to avoid having, because really you don't want to be in a situation where you're just opening a file, copying your framework, putting your text in, saving it, opening up another template, copying your text in, and saving it. Eventually what happens is when you want to make a change to your framework, then you have to reopen all those files. But for small sites, 5 pages, 10 pages, something like that, while annoying isn't really a daunting task. So having a nice template file, saving it as template, and then when you need to add another page or make changes to it, you open it up. You'd have your sections in here. This is where I'm going to put this content. This is where I put this content. This is where I put this content. And then you just save it and post it. So, but the key is to do the work to get that template in place, and that's where a lot of frustration is. Typically, most sites have 2 templates: one for their main page, and then one for pages behind it, as far as business or corporate sites. Some more public sites or user-ended sites typically have one layout that they will use, or they're going to one layout, but then they use a lot of JavaScript to do the updates for that. So this is actually, what I covered here is kind of what the basics are, to just get to the point where you're ready to try to implement JavaScript or other things on your site to bring animation to it, make it start to react. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Yes. And then when I come to these examples, there's the code pin link, so you can actually bring it up and then see how it will end up render, and then you can try different things within the CSS and HTML sections to see how it's actually going to render. In each one of the samples, when I was jumping back and forth between HTML and CSS, has a code pin link on it, so you can review exactly what I was doing at that time. Any other questions?